told me he did the Great Escape.
I know, but
What happened?
he's still there.
No, he never went.
Not recapped.
At 5 a.m. when I walked, he got COVID, so he was in the hospital for a week. They sent him to a rehab center,
Yeah.
and he hated it. And at 5 o'clock next morning, he arranged with his lady friend and a neighbor to escape. Walked out.
I love it.
They picked him up in front of him.
It's like a movie.
And the police didn't follow, did
Like,
they?
yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
The police didn't follow, did they?
Pardon?
Police didn't follow after the Great
Well, but
Escape.
he left without medical advice, he left without oxygen, he left without, what was the third thing?
His meds, probably.
His meds, yeah. And so they're driving home, he's only been on oxygen since he was in the hospital, so they're driving home, he thought, I conquered this. He starts wheezing, so they detour to the dock in the box.
I wonder if they told the whole story, like, well, we just escaped from the hospital, and here's the situation
Yeah.
it is.
Right.
I am. Oh, I know.
Let's hope
So they kept him all
so.
day on oxygen, so we have three choices, you go back to the hospital, back to the rehab center, or we'll send you home with the tank, but you gotta get your own prescription here and get a refill.
Wow.
So he took option 3.
Yeah.
Okay.
Should relook at that.
How long ago was this?
A month.
Okay. He's doing all right now, or?
Well, he's exhausted.
Sure.
93, he's
Yeah.
exhausted, so.
Wow.
But he's home,
He's home, yeah.
Okay.
so he'll be better.
You need a strength built back up, and the
Mhm.
visiting nurses, probably in 10 days you'll be off, oxygen. They said that to walk twice from one end of the house to the other, he's pooped out.
Yeah.
I tell you, there was a mountain lion on my street.
Well, I'm glad he's okay.
Yeah.
They caught him
That's a
on
good
camera.
story, too.
One of my neighbors.
It
was
is.
like,
My sister called at 6 a.m. that morning.
Oh, yeah,
He
just
escaped
Mike
the
is
car.
over
That's
there.
right.
I said, Steve
Waiting
McQueen
to find
lives.
you.
Yes.
The great escape, yeah, that's awesome.
Where we go walking, about 4 or 5 times a week. There, I've never seen a mountain lion. I don't think they would ever go that close where, where they don't have a lot of, camouflage.
Oh, yeah.
But deer,
Mm-hmm.
bunnies, cottontails, oh,
Oh, where was this?
it's out on the point, on the
Okay.
point.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Tell me about it.
And, let's see, what else? Well, those are the 2 star attractions.
We just were driving into our driveway 2 days ago. There's this teenager buck, I think, because I've watched this guy. He's likes to hang around my yard, and he's got nice antlers now. And he's just right in front of the car. And then get out, take a photo. And he just hung around. He kind of came closer. I mean, he knows us.
Mhm.
Yeah, they get that,
But then the mountain lion is around, so I'm thinking, dude.
Oh, well, that's
watch
why
out.
the mountain lions are.
I
Mhm.
know.
Yeah, because the
Yeah.
deer are scared of him.
Yeah.
You may have a small
February after it.
Maybe. Yeah, Dawn confirmed he will be here. Marianne told me she's gonna be about 10 minutes late.
Okay.
David's on Zoom because he's actually homesick.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, David and William have COVID.
Yeah, that's there's Carol.
Hi, Carol.
Carol?
Hello.
Oh, you're okay. We're having a little delayed start. We're waiting on a couple members still.
I just had some chips. Is your wife at it again?
No, this is my own doing now.
Oh, okay.
We're gonna ask people to come and join us. I should have snacks. So
Oh, that's nice.
we have a veritable cornucopia of now of snacks.
Ah. Nice touch. Oh, thank you. Ha-ha.
Hi, Dawn. Good night.
You're okay. You're not the last one, so you're good.
No pressure.
Good.
Well, we could start.
Yeah, we could get through the phone through stuff. Sure.
Since we
Hold
know
on, I think I
Marianne
already
is
have
gonna be about 5 more minutes.
Mhm.
Yeah, give me a second.
I have another Nantucket magazine for you.
I don't need my art design position form. Your design traditions one out, do we need that?
No stapler?
The design guidelines?
Well, let's see, I'm talking about, okay.
Yeah,
that's
the
Um,
February.
I'm talking about the old ones you asked us to read. Do you need those out for any reason?
You shouldn't need those for this conversation. It was just more to familiarize yourself with how it used to work.
Which one? Promotion cost. He has a friend that has an helicopter. Went up the morning after.
All right, I think it's gonna be the A team. And Neil, hello.
Hey, Neil.
The diehards. How come you're so fancy today, Don?
Yes, you look so handsome.
Oh, thank
Oh,
you.
good morning, David.
Trying to remember now.
We all look like we're schleppers.
It's not for us, is it? Is it for us that you're all fancy?
Sure, you fancy, because I wore my blazer.
Yeah, exactly. Button down in a blazer.
How you doing? I just wanted to pick up. It is.
Okay, so we're gonna get started because Marion's a little bit delayed, and we're gonna just, oh, thank you. Welcome, everybody. We have 2 folks on Zoom and 2 folks in the room. And I wanna take a moment to thank everybody for all this volunteering that's going on. I just had a moment of great appreciation as I was just thinking about this meeting, how much work this has been. And I really appreciate everybody chipping in. So we're going to call to order. We have so far 4 out of the 5 is the roll call. Does anyone have any comments on non-agenda items, either in the Zoom room or in the room? Public comments, meaning only you 2. So I can pass this. I just want to say David is not here. Oh,
He's on the Zoom.
Yeah, David is not here because he has COVID, so Brandon can relate. Yeah, that's all.
David, can you speak, or do you want to speak on anything not on the agenda? Also, Leah is there on the, I think, on the Zoom. Hi, David.
Thank you. Thank you for asking. I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry, feel better soon.
Thank you.
Anyone else in Zoom?
That's Leah in my office.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't know. Welcome, Leah. Oh, Evan Court, also in the office. I also recognize that.
Brandon, I just wanted to ask you again about, and I know you're sick of hearing this, ask you again about where we are on landscaping and everything, because I attended the Forest and Beach Commission meeting last night where they were talking about the Forest Master Plan, because I thought we all ought to know something about it. And I'm just wondering if we should think about having a citizens group like ours work with the consultant on the forest, not on the Forest Master Plan, excuse me, about the land use ordinance for the landscaping aspect of whatever we're doing. I mean, I think that would be really helpful, and incorporate people, as much as we can, like we're functioning now, people who are really interested to join us. Would that be something beneficial, or you would like to consider?
So fortunately for me, that question is above my pay grade. So the last time we spoke to the city council about the landscape ordinance, if you remember, they said they wanted to sort of run that process. We're working on it on the side. I think that it would be worthwhile, if you wanted to come, and I can ask the question too at the next city council meeting if that's something they want to set up. I mean, this was an appointed body by the city council, so I don't have any authority to make that decision. Whether or not we set up a separate citizen group. Of course, any ordinance of the city goes through the typical process. It's going to go, to the planning commission for workshops. It's going to come to the city council. So there's going to be a public process involved already, much like the wireless ordinance that's going through right now. So there's been plenty of public feedback on that. So that's just something to keep in mind. But right now, there's no plans to create a separate steering committee for the landscaping ordinance specifically.
Can I just ask a follow-up real quick? Is that, because Melanie was mentioning that, because she was at this meeting, that there are other parallel landscape or tree-related processes going on?
Yeah, not landscaping, but forest management.
Oh, forest management, okay. And is that, do they have
did the council appoint folks to help with that process?
The council did not appoint someone to manage that process. The Forest and Beach Commission, who is the keeper of the forest, basically, they set up their own sort of subcommittee to do it, but it wasn't council appointed. So the Forest and Beach Commission made a subcommittee of themselves to work on the forest management plan, but no, the city council did not.
Okay.
Yep.
And there's only the normal public component to that, so it's like an ad hoc out of the Forest and Beach, and that's helping with the management plan?
That's right. So like for example, the community meeting that took place on the urban forest management plan with David Resources, that was a meeting of the Forest and Beach Commission, sort of like subcommittee, if you want to call it. I think they're actually calling themselves a steering committee. That was a meeting of that group on the forest management plan with the community. So they have their own track they're doing, because the forest management plan falls under the purview of the Forest and Beach Commission.
So it's a two-person ad hoc?
No, it's 10. It's 10 people. It's the full Forest and Beach Commission plus 5 more people. So it's a 10-person ad hoc community.
So it's a Brown Act compliant?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was noticed and Brown Act compliant and all that stuff. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's why it has a public component. And those two processes, the landscape ordinance and this one you just mentioned, is that pretty much the full scope of what's going on in landscape right now? Are there any other, parallel things that you're working on? No. Okay. All right. Sorry, Melanie. Just clarifying
No,
myself.
Brandon, I was there from 3:30 until about 7 o'clock last night. And I noticed that there is potentially some issues with an overlap from what they're doing and we're doing, especially the right-of-way. And in the enforcement of the design traditions all the way around between the Planning Commission and the Forest and Beach Commission. So I just wanted to alert you, all of you, to that issue. And there has to be some way of getting it across to the committees and commissions that, the design guidelines are to be taken seriously. And when you see them not being enforced or considered on a regular basis, it just causes you a great deal of concern. And so I hope that all of the hours that we've all spent are not in vain when we finalize this project. So, we're going to have to ensure that at least they receive all of this stuff, and maybe they have homework that they have to do, so that
The Forest Management Group, right?
I'm talking about the Forest and Beach Commission. I'm talking about their group that they have appointed. Yes. And of course, I know Brandon's going to take care of the staff and Planning Commission, but I'm also very concerned about basically the Forest and Beach Commission and this committee that they have appointed, which I find very unusual. I don't think I've ever seen the city do something like that. So I was just surprised.
Why did they create the commission?
Hold on one second. We're on. I thought we were on to announcements by the.
I think
Private.
we've kind of moved on to update our consultant and staff.
I'll
Yeah.
answer the question later, Neil.
And David, I see your hand is up, but are you on? I'd have to go back to public things not on the agenda. Is that okay for now? Okay. Anyone else have an announcement from the 5 of us? That's things on or off the agenda. Okay. All right, Brandon, did you want to, now we're moving on now to,
Well, I want to make a
oh, okay, make a comment, and then we're going to go to.
Yeah. So just so everyone's aware, and I think we talked about this before, so the forest management plan is effectively being shepherded by staff, sort of like counterparts of mine in the Public Works and Forestry Department. I have, sort of adjacent to them at the hip, like following along. Like I'm not taking the lead on that project, but I'm involved, and we're having conversations. So I've been at those meetings. I've been sitting at the table with the consultant that's doing the work, making sure that there's an awareness of this project that's been going on for a year and a half. So I assure you, there's not a disconnect. The staff up in the forestry department will be responsible for making sure that their body, being the Forest and Beach Commission and the subcommittee of it, stays aware of that. But I can assure you that they're well aware that this project is going on and are getting those resources. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Brenda, I'm so glad you're involved.
Okay, so now we're moving, I've seen no other announcement. We're moving to item 4, which is the staff update on the consultant and staff work products. Thank you, Brandon. Over to you again.
Yeah, I feel like I'm halfway done with this one already. So we just talked about landscaping. Victoria and I met. We talked about sort of the next succession of meetings over the next month or so. Today's meeting representing one of those, where we're going to go through and talk about this. We're going to call it the sandwich, but like what the reconstruction of the design guidelines looks like. Next meeting, we'll talk about a project timeline that I'm putting together for all of you that shows what the specific tasks at a more granular level. If you remember when we most recently heard from the city council, the direction was 1, we need to start targeting a wrap up in December, and 2, to more closely follow the scope of work that was approved by city council when we started on this, the Nori Winter scope of work. So we're going to build a project schedule that outlines all the tasks that need to be done. It's going to clearly state, who's doing like what, for example, would be, a staff task that we will then bring back to the committee for comments. What's a committee task to work on actually producing something. So we'll have that conversation. That'll be the following meeting. And then we have a few cleanup items to do. We need to finish up our conversation on the buildable envelope, specifically with the front 15 feet. I feel like we resolved the envelope itself, but the front 15 feet, the opacity of structures in the front. So we're going to have a little more conversation about that. And a couple little cleanup items with respect to the commercial area brevity draft design guidelines. We didn't really get to we're doing this exercise going through all of them as a last cleanup, and we just didn't finish that. And there's a couple of little check boxes to get through, like fire pits and things like that. So that'll be a meeting in and of itself. And then the other one coming up in the near future, and all these things, I'm telling you about these things because this is what we're working on right now, is preparing for these meetings. The last one that we're targeting specifically right now is the meeting I think everyone's probably pretty excited to have, is going through the full draft that was produced in February and looking at the pictures that came out in this and seeing, one, the question, is it a good picture? Does it represent what it was supposed to? Do we need to retake it? Or 2, are there things written in the guidelines that don't have photo representation that we should, and making a list of that. So effectively what we'll be doing as a group is creating a photo shoot list. So like a hit list of pictures we need to go. When I say we, that could include, the wonderful community members who have volunteered, who we've asked not to do anything yet. Everyone's sort of on hold for that project, but who have volunteered to help us out take those pictures. So we need to create that shot list. So that'll be a meeting where we'll sit here together and go through page by page and look at pictures and say, does this one need to be replaced? Is it even necessary? Or are we missing any pictures that we should have in here? So that's what we've been working on. We're getting ready for the next series of meetings, which I think will be really productive and get us closer to that December target that we have now.
Thanks, Brandon. It's a good overview. It's possible that maybe that's not necessarily in total order, although I know the timeline one is next. What we're now turning on to, unless there's any questions about 4 from the group, is number 5, which is our bulk of our agenda today, the discussion item. And I just want to mark this moment because we're moving from, this deep dive we've been doing on the principles that we think are in the enforceable column to an overall presentation of whatever material we think is appropriate to bolster these principles, whether it's background information, whether it's process information, all that stuff. And I think Brandon's been kind enough to prepare this very detailed checklist sheet that'll help guide our discussion, and I'm sure he's welcome to take charge of that. But also, I want to encourage folks, if they think that, we have over the course of these months come up with ideas also that aren't necessarily present in the document now and maybe never have been For example, I always come back to the one that Jeff Barron introduced at a council meeting of, and we've talked about this extensively, putting some onus on the applicant to review and check and argue for the ways in which their project actually meets the guidelines, which I think is a brilliant idea, and I think that that's actually going to have to be part of this somewhere. It wasn't part of the February draft because I don't think we'd come up with it yet. So I just want to encourage folks to not, feel completely restricted to what's here, but we are definitely going to try to get through that maybe as a priority. Brandon, do you want to work on this? Okay.
Yeah. So what I'm hoping we can do, and this, and I'll look to the chair here to see if you're okay proceeding this way. With all due respect to the community members are here, we're really trying to get feedback from the committee on this. Maybe we can get through some sections and then open it up for public comment on what we just discussed. But one of the things we heard also from the council was that the committee is the one that really should be making the formal recommendations and decisions. We want to hear from the community, but as far as like the discussion to make a decision, I don't know, Victoria, how you want to handle that, because I think if we have a big round, super table discussion about every single one, we may never get through it. So maybe we can try that, just batching,
I think batching is a good idea.
go through 5 or 10 and say, does anybody have anything we just talked about? Okay. Okay, so the concept here then, what we're going to do, everyone has the checklist in front of them. And if you're online with us and you want to see the checklist we're working through, it's available on the city's agenda website on the agenda as an attachment. But effectively what we're doing is we're going through every section of the draft guidelines that came out in February. And we're just going to do residential because they're formatted the same. And I can take away from this meeting and do the same treatment to the commercial ones. We're not going to have to go through both. I'm just looking for feedback on the structure, and I'll let you ask a question in a second. What we'll do is we'll just go through each, and you can see on the checklist that I created, there's a page number and a name of the section. And this gets down to even, subheaders. And the purpose of this is we're rebuilding what we've been calling the sandwich. So we've created the meat, the central part of the design guidelines, which are those brevity drafts. Those are the enumerated, the numbered guidelines with very specific criteria, and what they are. What we're doing now is we're building around that meat in the sandwich to put in some of the things that we feel are important for practitioners, architects, developers, builders, my staff, the public, anyone who's going to use this document to be able to understand what it is. The options that I'm asking for feedback on is to either keep a section as is, and I'll figure out where to put it back into the document. I'm happy to get some feedback, but this will create a new document to look at. So either keep it in the main body of the document, delete it altogether, meaning it's superfluous, we don't need it, maybe we feel like it's covered somewhere else, or put it in an appendix later. So we're not saying it's not important, but it isn't really necessary for the main body of the document. So those are the 3 options we're hoping to get out of everyone. And again, the point of this is not to wordsmith any of these sections. I understand there's a lot of words here, and we could spend all day like we have done on the design guidelines and wordsmith these sections. Let's focus on the title of the section and whether or not we think that information would be helpful to the reader, to the user of the design guidelines. And I saw Mary Ann had a question.
I want to make sure we have a table of content. That's not listed. So, and whether it's okay, I would like to actually follow with the existing guidelines rather than with the draft, and then to make sure that nothing that's in here that we might find as important was dropped there. Sure. So then we have one check.
Yeah, so Mary Ann's going to keep an eye on the 25-year-old version as we're going through this. I'm fairly certain that nothing was dropped, but if you see something, please let me know. We'll make sure we take a note of that.
And Brandon, would you mind just I just wanted to take a moment to now that Brandon's outlined the process for the day, does anyone on the steering committee have any, comments about that?
Conceptually, we're talking about formatting. Is the idea we're going to have a single volume with chapters like this book, or we're going to have individual pamphlets that if you come in and you just want the design review guidelines for commercial, you can pick that. You don't have to go through a volume that has the appendix.
So the answer is, we're going to keep it as one book. I mean, I can say as a user of this document, it would be very difficult to have multiple pamphlets to go through. So we're going to create one guidelines, again, rebuilding that sandwich, so it's one sandwich, not a bunch of pieces of meat spread out all over the place. I love my food metaphors because they're easy to understand.
Yeah, and just one comment to that. I think the fact that Doug raises the question might beg the answer that the way it's formatted, and this is almost a graphic design question, is that you could say someone comes in for the lettuce and says, I'd like to just, I know that, just remind me of the process. And then that is a removable chapter. It's a chapter. I'm not saying that it's independently printed or anything, but you can say, oh, just that's pages 10 through 12, as opposed to any kind of bleeding, I mean, between the, but Marian, go ahead.
Yeah, I would assume that this will become a searchable document online, which means you just search for what you need. But the idea of having different handouts, I agree that would not be very user-friendly for us who use it on a very regular basis.
I agree with from a staff perspective, the usability too, but what I've seen throughout the years of doing this profession is that if you hand someone and say, this is the guidelines on this, and they don't have anything else attached to it, they'll say, well, you never told me about this other stuff. So I think I don't think that's a good idea yeah. So I do have a reason. It's not just because I don't want to do it. Yep. Yep, it's a good thing to think through. Okay, so with that, let's just dive right in. So we're going to start on page 3 of the February draft of the residential design guidelines. We're in part 1, introductory materials. One thing I will say is you'll see there's some repetition of how these were originally formatted. We've got introductory sections sprinkled throughout. So on page 3, the very first one is just titled An Introduction to the Design Review Process. These are really preambles. We talked a lot about this during when we were working on the specific numbered design guidelines. So it's an introduction to the design review process, what are the design guidelines, and the scope of the guidelines. So these are your first 3 here on page 3. I guess I'm just going to look around. We can pass the microphone, thumbs up, thumbs down. I don't know how we want to do this.
Since Marianne brought up the table of contents, and I know that it would be coming before page 3, right? Mm-hmm. So is the table of contents just a list, or is there something or is there something before the table of contents? That's another question.
No, we will have a table of contents. Nobody be worried about a table of contents. We'll figure out what it looks like and how it's numbered and how it's structured once we get through this exercise. But there will absolutely be a table of contents. I don't know yet. Yeah, we don't know yet. But there will be a table of contents. I didn't even think it was worth putting on a checklist of whether or not to have a table of contents because it seems so obvious to me that we would have a table of contents. So the question is still introduction, this introductory stuff, an introduction to the design review process. What are the design guidelines? So explaining to someone what a design guideline is meant to do, and the scope of the design guidelines talks about how far-reaching it is and where it goes out into the development process.
Did you have your hand up, Melanie? Or just hand is halfway up?
You first.
No, go ahead. I'll come back.
I look at the original one and I look at that one, and I think that chapter is very needed, but I think it needs a ton of work. I mean, this is way too, like you said, repetitive and disorganized, but I don't think that this new one is a lot more helpful, frankly, the way it's written. I don't think so. So I don't know how we go about it, but I think it should be one concise chapter that in generally addresses everything that is addressed here, but I think it could be done in half the words and much better organized.
Okay, that's exactly the feedback that I need.
My comments are basically the same. I think that, or very similar. I think that, you know, you can do an introduction to the process and take a sentence or two, streamline it out of the, about the design guidelines and then the scope and what are the design. Just take a couple of pithy sentences out of those two paragraphs and add them to an introduction, and that's basically that's all we need. I mean, that's my thought. Anybody else?
I might want to add that the graphic design, I think, for this particular chapter is particularly important because that leads to understanding. And this, I mean, has a mix of fonts and very strange mix of fonts and things like that, and also font sizes. So I think just it's very granular what I'm talking about, but I think that all has a lot to do with clarity of a document.
Thank you. Pass the microphone around.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Maybe I'll just add in that it seems to me that a number of the things from the first 10 pages could become an introduction to the document. I'm not sure all of them.
Too far, that's okay.
Well, yeah.
Because I have.
Okay.
I have a thought for these next couple.
Okay. All right.
Just on page 3. If that's
I know. But I mean, Marianne and others are saying select certain sentences to make the intro. I think, first of all, I'd limit that to no more than 1 page, that intro. But also, I think you might want to go further afield for the intro than just that first page. But I'll let you keep going, Brandon.
All right. So that's the page 3, the beginning of the introduction. And so the reason I said let's hold off on it just for a second is that some of the next sections on page 4 and 5 have more to do with like technical, so like how a design guideline is formatted. And Victoria and I talked about this with the way that the new numbered design guidelines are written. They perhaps don't even need as much of a formatting section. So I do think that there's a need. I guess I'll start giving recommendations on these. I would recommend we do have some nod to what the format looks like. Not necessarily calling that an intro. I still think some of these headers, like the format of a guideline so people know what it is that we're about to tell them, are important, but doesn't need to have as much. This is somewhat confusing actually, having this like big slide here. So it's way too much. You just need a couple of sentences of how they're formatted. Same thing with the organization. I think that this doesn't necessarily have to be a big long written thing. I think it'd be more of a pictogram kind of thing that shows how the different sections are lined up. So again, I think these two things are important to keep as part of our sandwich, but because they're more structural in nature, I think we can do a better job of representing them. That's why I wanted to break out these 2 pages separately. So if we could talk about the format for a guideline and how the guidelines are organized, see what you all think about those comments, that they're useful, but need to be very far pared back as their own separate little intro.
I'll chime in. For my money, I would do the thought experiment of eliminating them because, and this is why I asked about the table of contents. I think that's what a table of contents is. It tells you where the intro is. It tells you where the information is. I wouldn't even mind a table of contents that had maybe a note under it. But I think it is odd, frankly, to aspire to a document that requires this level of explanation, even in an abbreviated form. So I would recommend, this is for my colleagues to weigh in on, but that we try it without it. So I'm putting a delete in my checkbox, but that would be, sort of you see if it works, and if it doesn't work, then maybe you have to reintroduce it. I cannot imagine needing it if you have a very good table of contents. But we don't have that yet, so we don't really know. 4 and 5.
Your comment was on 5 also.
Yeah, isn't it? Yeah, 4 and 5. How it's organized, what the format is. How it's organized is a table of contents in my mind. So what do you all think?
I've broken it down a different way. I took pages 3 through 6 as educational. So I think they ought to be kept. I took page 7 through 10 to be processed. I think those can go to the appendix. And from page 11 through 13, that's historical. That can go to the appendix. And then we get to the guidelines. I think the most important thing we want are the guidelines.
I think the whole thing has to be rewritten in a one page. I think an introduction is very important. I think that just a table of contents wouldn't do, I think. But it just, the whole thing, I think, needs to be, because there is sentences and pieces on each page of the original guidelines that I do think have value and we should keep. But what we pull out of that and how that goes together is just work that needs to be done, I think, to create a new introduction to the new design guidelines. Since the new design guidelines have now a completely different format, I think it needs a completely new introduction. And that's something I don't think we can solve right here. So.
You're the distinguished gentleman in the room with the coat, the jacket, the authority.
I'll pipe up when I think it's appropriate.
All right. You must agree with everything
That'll teach you to
so
dress
far.
up.
That's right. Melanie, any thoughts on this? You have a mic here.
I just believe that whatever we're doing in this introductory part needs to be more terse and concise. Condense is the proper word. I mean, there's just too much verbiage here and waiting too long to get to the main information and material that people need. And I think it's a frustration for people. I think it turns them off. And because if it takes you 10 pages to get to something, it's like, what am I doing? So I think that agreeing with Marianne in this way, that there's important material from the original documents of, years gone by, but I think that it all can be condensed very concisely. And so it does need a lot of work.
Oh, you're done.
Oh, you got something finally. Oh, goodness gracious.
Because I've had this feeling all the way through this process. It's too much verbiage.
Right.
It needs a
Crisp and,
high degree of editing.
yes, I agree.
Let me try something.
Okay, go.
So I hear you all, and I agree with you 100%. And we will do the editing, and you'll be presented with something that's much more trimmed down. I just want to make sure we're focusing on what should be in that trimmed down version. So using these headers as that conversation, things like how the guidelines are organized. Is that an important thing at least to mention in this trimmed down version? Victoria said no, but I haven't heard from anyone else. So if you look at, just briefly look at this, what this is trying to tell people is that it's organized in such a fashion that the beginning tells you about concept when you're building the concept of your project, and it's organized so the second half of it is the final details. So there is some value in explaining to people more than just where it falls in the document, but the organization of the thought of the guidelines. So I just throw that out there for the conversation as well.
Well, if this is rewritten because we have to deal with a new format, you would be saying something along the lines of, we have a sandwich here. There's an intro, there's the meat of the guidelines, and then there's some information at the end. That, to me, is clear in the table of contents. I don't see how that adds. This is a written version of a table of contents. I think, in general, what we've been trying to say is feedback, but again, I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, so please disagree. But I think we've been trying to convert long essays about things that are really lists, for example, or are really an illustration or whatever, and just categorize that material. You don't have to write a paragraph or an essay about every aspect of this document. So this is, when I look at this, I think that is a table of contents. This is a redundant page because this is putting into essay form what a table of contents is.
I definitely.
I know you heard that.
I want to hear what these four have to
Right,
say about
but in general, I think that is not necessarily, I don't know if anyone agrees with that for page 5, but I think that is the general idea that we're after.
So I think we've hit the Frostonian divide in the road. Where are the guiding principles?
They're here, we'll get there.
We're going through the February.
Yeah, they're in here. They were in the February draft.
No, they've been augmented.
Well, but they're in here. The section's here, and we'll get to it.
I think he's saying, where do you put them?
Is
Where
that,
should
I
they
think
be
you just
put?
said, where do they exist? You were saying they don't exist.
Policies exist, but the format was a different format, and that's what we spent months on. Now we're back to Dory's draft.
Well, just to see
So
if
here's
we've
the
left
guiding
anything out.
principles, all 6 of them. The words have changed slightly, but they were put in the February draft as well.
I think there's a general maybe disconnect that Victoria is and Doug are saying the idea was to use this document that was created about the guiding principles as such in the new design guidelines. And I think what you are saying is the NOI draft just lists the principles and then it lists everything else. And I think that's the main disconnect here. I think that there is the impression here that we are working with just that brevity draft, right? And adding a preamble or however, whatever you call it, to that, because I also felt that there needs to be a lot kept from that part 1, like the introduction, the history of the town and all that. So do I interpret that correctly, Doug? Yeah.
I think we're on the same page, so let me try.
But Nori doesn't have that brevity draft in it.
No, exactly. No, we're building on top, so we're keeping that. Let me, if I could. So we're not back to any measure of keeping this February draft. That's not what we're doing here. So the brevity draft versions, that's staying. That's the meat. That's the middle. What? That will be part 2. So something is going to come out of this exercise that's going to be a redraft of this with the brevity section in the middle, the meat of the sandwich. What we're doing here is that I feel very strongly, and I know Mary Ann has expressed this and others have as well, is that there are things in here, the condiments, the lettuce, the tomatoes, the pickles, whatever. There are things in this February draft, because this is the totality of it, so we're going to need to use this, that we want to pick up out of here and bring over and make part of that sandwich with the brevity draft that we've created. So I don't want anybody to be thinking that we're trying to go back to the February draft as the new guidelines, but we need to go back through this because the only thing that we've discussed out of this are the numbered guidelines is the meat. So we have to go through this and decide what is important to keep, not necessarily in language, but in like the purpose or the content of it. So that's what we're doing right now. That's why I picked off the headers, because really it just tells you what that condiment is, not what it tastes like, but what it is. It's good, huh?
Yeah, it's very
All right. Okay.
Does that make sense, Doug? Okay. I didn't want you to think we were trying to go back to this at all. Okay.
But I thought when Doug raised it just now, that what he was trying to say is, where are they, meaning shouldn't they be forward? Is that what you're saying? I don't know. Or not like we've lost them, but, should they be more, because part of what we have maybe to cover today, Brandon, is not just a yes or no, but maybe like yes if it's in the front, or no unless it's in the back, or something. I don't know, and because these are formatting questions.
If something's important to keep, we would keep it. Then we can, once we know what the things we're keeping are, then we can figure out where they make sense to go. I mean, where it's placed in the document shouldn't be a deciding factor of whether or not it's important to know, I think, personally, just from a structural perspective. So I do still feel like this is our first exercise. Yeah, that'll be the next stab at this. Okay, so I hear what you're all saying, and it makes good sense.
And nobody wants to, Doug counter-argued to what I said. He said maybe you could pick up some stuff that's in these page 3 and 4 and 5 and reintegrate it, and I'm saying try it without. I don't know if anyone has any final thoughts on that, because we should all just keep score too on our own sheets. and see if we have a consensus that way. That's another way to check. So I added a column in the front, heavily edit or reduce/edit. So the introduction, Marianne said she wanted major revisions. I put a little check there. What are the design guides, the scope of the design guides? That's all 3. So, and then I, for my personal view, put 4 and 5 as a delete. And then now we're at 6. And then, Doug went ahead and said, I'm just recapping, obviously, go from 3 to 10 and put that all in a heavily revised thing, which might be,
3 to 6.
oh, just 3 to 6, okay. Which is what Marianne, I think, is saying. And Marianne is saying that.
Yeah, those are good compartments, I think. And 7 to 10 will be the next one.
And 6, how the guidelines are used. The format for a guideline is 7.
7, 8, 9, and 10 are more like structural things.
Well, 7 is, I would argue, is more attached to 6 than the prior. The other ones move into the design review process. So page 7, oh, sorry, I'm on the old document. Pardon, my fault. Sorry.
So I feel 7 is one of the most important, aside from the actual guidelines, I think that is the most important section in the guidelines, because I think without understanding the history of the town, you're not going to do a good job with understanding. Yeah, 7. 9, I'm sorry, I'm 9, okay. No, I'm on the draft, yeah.
Factors that distinguish one neighborhood from another.
Yeah, that's,
No, I think she's on a different one.
7 is part 2, design traditions downtown. Did I not?
We were looking at the residential one.
Oh, you're downtown.
Oops, I'm sorry. I pulled the wrong one. I apologize. No wonder that it is.
So then let's get back on the real 7 for a second, because this is design review tracks, which I So I thought I was about to agree with you, Marion, that 7, that we're really looking at design review tracks, is a good piece of information. People need to know that, I think, for sure. So I would keep it and integrate it in some way.
Yeah, Doug's saying that should be an appendix.
Oh, appendix, okay. Does that, tell me what's the consensus, appendix? Okay, I'm okay with that, actually.
I mean, process should be something that's at the end that would,
Don, do you have an opinion about that? And Melanie, you're easy. I'm easy on that one. I can put in the appendix, no problem. Don?
Yeah, I could go along with that.
Go along with appendix. Okay, so there's a clear answer for you. Yay! That means we're moving on to 8.
I think 9 and 10 are all, 7, 8, 9, 10 are all,
Process. But neighborhood,
maybe not.
neighborhood is different.
7, 8, 9. Yeah.
I think 9 and 10 are about kind of design. Here's what you need. This is like almost history of Carmel, and thinking about design is the next page.
I would agree with that. 9 is more adjacent
To 10?
11, 12.
do we need 9?
I don't think we need 9. I'm an eliminate for 9. I'm a vote for eliminate.
yeah, it's not really important.
Are you okay with that? Doug is okay with that. Don, so page 9 is things that distinguish different neighborhoods from one another. 4 out of 5 of us so far are tossing. What do you think, Don? You okay? You're outnumbered anyway, so. But gaining project approval, that's process going to the back, right? Okay. And understanding context. This is page 10.
Really important.
That's,
You say important,
yeah.
Marianne? Okay, that's too strong. Importance for retain. It's a nice graphic. I will make one editorial comment about it that's general. Brandon, I agree, I like it. I think it would be nicer if it picked up on the vocabulary of the principles, the main principles. So, for example, I have the city is really the urban forest. It's a forested city. So that allows you to align it with the 6 principles. So I think the idea that we understand context as an urban context is certainly not true in residential. And so it's not a one-size-fit-all that you might do for New York. I think it has to align with the principles that we.
I hear what you're saying. That's I think that's an easy edit. It's really just following the the format, the language, the verbiage of the rest of the guidelines. That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, if it's okay if I just keep going, yeah. So that gets us to historic development patterns, which represents 3 pages, 11, 12, 13. So let's focus on those 3, because then that gets us into some pictures. So let's talk about this. I mean, this is, again, that thing that we talked about earlier, trying to put into someone's head how we got where we are, understanding the past so you can respect it, not necessarily duplicate it, but respect it in what you're doing. So I'm curious, 3 pages is a lot, but do we feel like it needs to be trimmed down? Do we feel like it's good as is? Do we feel like it's not needed at all? Curious.
And personally, just a quick comment. I don't know if you feel strongly about this, Brandon, but I would say that this goes beyond 3 pages in this current document, that it actually, the style, the historical styles and all that is a little bit of a part of that. The expansion of Carmel, that's the history of Carmel. So I would go all the way to 16 in answering Brandon's question as a chunk. But you feel free to do it anyway. But that's how I see it, that 11 through 16 is sort of about the history of the town.
Yeah. I think this section should be rewritten, and I started rewriting it. I think it's long. I think it's extremely important, but some of the things in here I don't agree with based on my research over the years and living here. And I don't know how the rest of you feel, but I think about the annexation. Is the annexation, page 16, really terribly important? It's nice information. It should go in the appendix or it should be dropped. I mean, it's not really germane, I don't think, to of what we're doing. So I think a sampling of styles is fine as long as we like the pictures. And I would just say that. I think some of this information that they have here could be condensed. I think that it's good, but I think, frankly, the emphasis to me is not there. I mean, in his old document, he did a very good job of talking about the importance of the forest and the whole, the whole ethos of Carmel. I don't think he's really done that. And since we're placing such an emphasis on our guiding principles about the importance of the forest, maintaining, preserving it and enhancing it, I think that a little more explanation of the importance of the forest, because people around here, I hate to tell you, they really don't get it. They don't understand the history of this forest. And if they understood the history of the forest, they would have more appreciation. They wouldn't be so quick to be planting totally ridiculous trees and plantings in this town, which is moving it away from the basic history of this town into something totally different, totally like, cutesy, California with a bunch of, flowers and inappropriate plants. And so I'm just on my stick about this, because it's really changing the town. And most of this is coming from these new people who move here who have no appreciation for trees. I mean, what do people in Dallas know about a forest? Give me a break. or Arizona, you know? So,
Texan bashing, okay.
They just have different forests, different trees. So what it highlights actually, Brandon, is what Melanie just said, is how important the history also is for the landscape ordinance. Because I think that that's hugely important, and that is how it could tie it together. You know, that this history section, the history of the forest, and basically a biology lesson of what is appropriate here, and the most stringent enforcement, because if you have a landscape plan, you're in full control over what people can and cannot plant. And it goes back to my wish that we had just a very, very stringent prescriptive plant list for the city. And that would just be such an enormous benefit for our streetscape, you know. But I respectfully disagree with you wanting to ditch the map. I would like to have it way up front. So just this map. And, you know, there's a lot of new people or young people that start working here as architects and designers, and having a map like this, and actually you know, for me, it was a total surprise as a newcomer that the old section of town is way back there. It's like, oh, if I would be the first person in town, I would want to be close to the beach. And they built all the way up there. So, I mean, that just tells you so much about the town and what happened here first. So I do think that that map's super important. And I actually think next to our new context, having the map right next to it really is a nice stepping stone to the written history. And since the new brevity draft is so forestry heavy, and there's a new landscape ordinance, I think having a section that just focuses on the history of the architecture in town, since these are architectural design guidelines, may be good, you know, it may be fine to not make that so forest heavy, but really have one section that focuses on the history of the buildings and have the landscape ordinance focus on the history of the forest. Anyway.
I agree with Marianne on keeping the annexation map. I agree with Victoria that pages 11 through 16 should be consolidated. The historic development pattern section needs to really be reworked, particularly looking at some of the reference sources that were used to garner the material, which are superficial in some cases and inaccurate in others. And I think all of this goes in an appendix in the back, the historic.
If you work here, you know, this is the first thing everybody should see who works in town, because people don't look at appendixes there that much, you know. That's really, I think, the reality of usage of the document. I don't know, you worked with it.
Well, at the risk of oversimplification, I see this whole thing as do's and don'ts, and then the why. And the do's and don'ts are very clear up front, the whole section. And then the rest has to be in the appendix. This is the reason you're doing all this. But if we don't make the forward part of it crystal clear, do this, don't do that, and so start talking about these, that's my feeling.
Don't you want to understand why you do something and do not do something? And that understanding only comes from studying the history. Yeah, you can condense it. Yeah.
One of my favorite things that I say to my staff, and they probably are so tired of hearing me say it, is that we have to show our work. We don't do math, but we still have to show our work. And so much similar point to Marianne's making from a practitioner perspective, sections like this are so important for showing your work. And I agree that there's a lot of trimming that can be done. But, you know, Dawn, I took the note from Dawn that, you know, this first part has to still keep in mind the do and don't, because that's what's so important about these guidelines, is understanding what is do and what is don't. And I think that this showing your work drives that do and don't point home, but it should be my suggestion would be, editing it down with that sort of framework in mind. Like what adds weight to showing work for the do and don't. But this kind of stuff, my personal perspective from a staff usability, I do think, like the map and all this stuff is very important up front, because this is where the battle, in my opinion, is won or lost. Because when people get to the guidelines, I think if they understand why we do or don't, we sort of show in our work and how we got there, I think it's going to hit a little bit harder. But we just need to do some editing to make it not so big. That would be my suggestion to the group.
Third way politics. I would, to satisfy Marianne, who maybe, and Brandon, maybe in the minority on this, I believe that the thing that welcomes you to this document could be a historically based essay. And by essay, I don't mean to sound grandiose, just a thought piece. Welcome to Carmel. This is why this is so important. The history of the town is incredibly important. It is a modest town. It has in a forest, etc., with nods to this information. That, I could argue, should be before the what are these design guidelines you're about to read. So if you want to put people in the right frame of mind without making them look at this and say, I know that Marianne is a very good student of the town, but we are focusing this toward also the people who are not good students of the town, who don't give a crap about the town, frankly. And nothing will force anyone to read this because it's up front. The thing that will force people to read it is it's digestible. If it's one page, history.
They don't give a crap, they're not going to read an essay either.
If it's one page and it's like, here's what you need to know about the town, now link to the back where the maps and the annexation and the samples and all that are for those who are really going to do a good job. Nothing is going to make, okay, I taught students for dozens of years. You skip to the part you think you have to know. That's what you do. So it has to be incredibly engaging. I would argue it has to be almost a flavor setting, an atmospheric piece with real information. Then you could argue that the next thing is the stuff that's currently at the front, because you're about to read the guidelines. The meat, if you want to know, okay, I'm about to read these, do I have to worry about, my neighbor did it, oh, it says precedents are not important. Oh, there's 2 tracks. Okay, that's good to know as I read this. Maybe not all of it applies to me. It doesn't apply to me because I'm only going to do an addition, or I'm not doing landscaping. I get it. And now I'm going to read the meat. But I can't imagine, I'm sorry, this is one of the problems of this document, is how forward heavy it is. But you don't have to lose this information. Right. Of course not. So I would keep it. I would make it better. I would also argue that things like this, the Monterey Pine Forest, anything, the historic context statement, everything should be linked through either the table of contents and or the appendix, so that you get actually more of this. You know where to go to do the deep dive. But that's my view. I think I'm capturing the 4 of us, but I'm not sure, so you guys can disagree.
If I understand you correctly, I do agree with what you're saying. A flavor piece up front, which draws you in, then you get into the meat.
I totally agree. I think the beginning of all this stuff pretty much can be second as a student and teacher of history.
Just trying to get people to do their homework is very difficult. Okay, Doug, your thoughts? I know Marianne disagrees.
I think this is good to know information, but it's not the principal purpose of the document. The principal purpose is to get to the guidelines. And this is fluff.
But history is not fluff. History is not fluff. So I think the flavor piece, having the flavor or understanding the town up front, if we're all in agreement with that, then it's only a question of how how that is organized. I think this is what engages you. A graphic like this engages you. And whether you can put this on 2 pages like this open or not is a matter of condensing the information and having all these reference materials linked or put in an appendix. I'm in full agreement of that. But basically, we're rewriting the history, but there will be a flavor history, understanding the town kind of a section.
Who's going to write that magic opening?
That'll be me. So one of the things we're gonna start doing from a more procedural perspective, and this was again, direction I heard from the council, is that, I'm coming to you all as, getting feedback on this. So that's the point of this. Is I'm taking copious notes today. I'm hearing what you're saying about things being condensed, things being moved, and so what's going to come out of this is then me and my team, we will create something to bring back to you and say, did we do what we heard from you at this meeting, and get comments on that. So that way, staff is the one producing materials. The steering committee's not writing and creating things. We heard that loud and clear from the city council. But I'm getting your feedback as we go along, and I'll bring something back that has been produced for you to then comment on. So more traditional, back and forth between, a formal body and the staff, like the back and forth of staff and producing something for you.
I have one more question. Are we, there was early on in the work last year, this request, more pictures, more pictures, more pictures. Is this staying, this sampling of styles or picture sampling question? Oh, okay, sorry.
I just flipped it to the appendix online.
Yeah, that was where I wanted to go next. I had broken it. I mean, you guys, and rightly you said that 11 through 16, which jumps over these 2 styles, but I think it would be helpful to get some feedback from you all if this sampling of styles, this sort of matrix, is something that's helpful to have at the front of the document, maybe with that piece, that sort of flavor piece, or if this also would be something that would go back into an appendix. So I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, I'm grouping everything page 11 through 16, maybe even beyond, to history and context that is deep dive for the appendix. So I would not lose the styles piece. I think to me it's part of the history of the town. It's the existing context of the architecture. That's what I meant when I said all that from 11 to 16, but others might disagree. Doug agrees. Don, I think, agrees. Melanie? Okay. Marianne?
Next question is, is this how it's organized? Do you think that that's a good way it is organized? That seems to be the consensus here, that this moves into an appendix. I think the organization of that appendix is going to be a big deal because so much lives there, and to that's not sort of apples and oranges then. And I want one suggestion or something to think about is, I really like that context, graphic, and statement, and that is organized into city neighborhood block site. And I wondered if we have as graphics, whether we should organize the graphics accordingly into neighborhoods, block, and site. It doesn't say history, it just says a sampling. I'm not quite sure actually what sampling does. I don't know whether that's the right word. What the intention was to showcase different styles.
These are the styles so these names tie into the historic context.
Mm-hmm.
These are enumerated styles in the historic context statement. So they do tie to this historic development pattern.
Mm-hmm.
These are the styles that we've seen develop historically over time. That's why they're there.
So maybe the flavor piece then connects to that with a reference. Okay.
Out of that flavor piece, everything should be hyperlinked, in my opinion. If it's touching,
If the flavor piece is acting as the essay introduction to the whole document, then anytime there's a word there that has more deep information somewhere else, of course, I think would be underlined and would clip you right to the, transport you right to the other thing. So if you, for example, say the word eclectic, languages, architectural language, they would put you right to this section of the document. Don.
I don't see how to reconcile those two things. A clear rhapsodic statement with too much detail.
No, it's just hyperlinks.
You click on it and it takes you to the appendix.
Okay.
It sends you somewhere else.
So if you say the word history, it would, maybe that would be underlined and it would take you to the chapter heading of the history of the town. You don't click on it while you're reading it necessarily. It's just like, oh, there's more about history. I'll come back to that, I'll click there. But that's the way you get it out of the essay, is you make it a link to something else that's much more involved. And I think that's going to be a very huge advance for this document, to have hyperlinks, or to be searchable at all.
Just to be searchable. All right, great, we're making excellent progress. So that takes us to page 17. Which is defining characteristics of Carmel. This again, if I'm guessing where you all might go on this, I think this is tied to that sort of flavor piece or flavor section. I mean, I'm just gonna say, I still feel like there may be a need for. Do we need to take a little
bio break?
Yeah, bio break. Okay. Sure. Let's take a 5-minute bio break. We'll come back at 2:15. It's 2:10 right now.
That's good.
Okay. I didn't know that. There's lots going on. That's news to me. Yeah, I was talking to Chip. One of the things I want to start putting out as like a living document, because we've heard now from so many people at the public meetings that people are starting to be concerned that maybe the city's doing too much at once, which is an interesting juxtaposition from a few years ago. Where it's like, what are you doing? You're not doing anything to move the city forward. So you can't make everybody happy, but I think it'll be helpful for the community have this ongoing sort of list of the big level projects, paid parking, ADU ordinance, design tradition, wireless ordinance, like where they're at, like what's the next big milestone coming for the community to sort of be aware of. That'll be something we can live on our website, go out in the party letter every week, and just kind of keep track of it. Because there's a lot going on, which I think is good. But yeah, if you're not as plugged in as some of you guys are, you may not know where stuff is in the process. So, but there's a lot going on. You're right. You are right.
In Carmel, what's going on in Carmel?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was just, I'm so impressed with the housing ordinance that, the ordinance, housing element, that just, that's a really good document, and then
Surprising.
how the process went and so.
It is really amazing that happened in less than a year.
Yeah.
Like other jurisdictions have been working on it for 2+ years and have not sent to the state.
Yeah.
They haven't even sent their draft.
It was really good.
Yeah.
Yes, so you're on the way. Keep it open.
You can take it over. There you go.
After that abrupt bio break.
Yeah.
Here was obviously needed.
Carol and Neil, I'm going to allow that. You read.
All right, it's still
That's an excellent example.
That is a good, I love that photo.
Which one?
This is the day.
One of my very
signed the cannabis, the marijuana ordinance.
Oh, jeez.
And so, you know how contentious it is, right? So the guy's been there less than a month. He gets to sign it Monday. It's on the planning commission last night to start talking about where in town, like actually doing the zoning, where to go. And so you can imagine, like, the planning commission was just totally dysfunctional. They didn't know what they're doing. The community was angry. But the most dysfunctional part for me at the government level was that the mayor was sitting in the front row of the audience at the planning commission, yelling at the planning commission from the audience. I was like, are you kidding? How can you possibly be more dysfunctional than this? And all of this has to go to the city council. I mean, it's an ordinance.
And the fire was coming from northeast.
I was flabbergasted.
Well, I guess.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. Yeah. So we're doing okay here, I guess is the point. We're doing okay from a functionality perspective. Yeah, it does. It does. All right, I think
We're
we're back.
back on track. Defining characteristics of Carmel neighborhood architecture and landscape 17 and 18.
All right, we are back from our short bio break, focusing on page 17 and 18. So defining characteristics of Carmel. I think, you know, what I heard from everyone, I'm going to suppose that this just becomes part of the flavor piece as well. I would offer to the steering committee as a recommendation that I know you may be leaning towards just a one-page sort of essay, but I think that some of these things are still, in my opinion at least, important to have some headers of their own, break them up into little different sections. So I would just, because we have some more of these things to go through, and all of them being important, you know, like building for scale, private landscape details, some of these introductory things, I think if we try to cram it all into one essay or like one paragraph, it might get lost. So maybe the paragraph or the essay or the flavor piece becomes just multiple small paragraphs with their own header, so at least you know what they're talking about. Just throwing that out, food for thought, but let's talk about 17 and 18 if that's okay.
Thoughts specifically about those pages?
Should be part of that flavor.
Part of the flavor? Part of the flavor?
Format, TBT.
I would also point out that so much of this is now covered at the meat.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we say that a landscape should be informal, and yet it's covered by the meat, I don't really know why it's there then. I think there's a lot of pressure on this piece at the front that we're now discussing. It's incredibly important, and yeah, it makes me wish we had like a, I don't know, maybe there's other documents that our town historian would know about that are inspiring around in this way, but maybe not. Maybe what we have is just major books written and so much scholarship about what makes it special, and just that act of condensing is going to be very difficult.
I mean, for what it's worth, I think we've. Thank you. For what it's worth, I think Mary Ann just said it's a good start. I agree. I think we've got the bones of it here. It's just now how does it get condensed and put into more digestible, rather than being in total essentially 24 pages. Can we make it 2 pages? Can we make it 3 pages even? I mean, that's a huge reduction. Yeah. So that's my big takeaway from this section that we're talking about, is that it's all important. Some of it lives up front, the stuff that can kind of set that tone and paint the flavor of the document, paint the flavor of the sandwich, if you will, or those things that maybe are still important but can be linked to in the appendix. Okay.
Are you trying to move on? So if we go down to these sort of broken up pieces, which are like more topic by topic, which gets you to page 24, I'm going to guess that a lot of this stuff is already in the meat. I'm just saying that. So like,
Yeah, let's just go page.
oh, you want to, okay.
Yeah, 17, so we're on 17 and 18 right now. So defining characteristics of Carmel, where it breaks it down by neighborhood, architecture, and
Goes into, we already talked about.
Yeah.
Goes into the flavor.
With for me, the caveat that no one should feel obliged to bring it all over. If it's in the meat, and it doesn't add anything, then don't bring it over, is my argument. I don't know if anyone, sounds like Marianne agrees with that. I don't know if anyone else agrees with that. Write the damn thing and then see, okay. All right, so 19, we're still, Brandon's speculating that 19 onward might be part of the informing the flavor. Okay, Marianne says no.
19 is a page that, as far as I'm concerned, can go. I don't think we need that altogether. I don't think we need page 19 and the design guidelines up front or anywhere else, as far as I'm concerned. But
Through 24. How about through 24? Oh.
Comment one by one, right?
Okay. All right. I agree with Mary Ann.
She wants it out entirely, you also out entirely.
So the favorite
Favorite
streets,
streets and features.
I just, look at 19. How do we get rid of the thought of sense of discovery, trees everywhere, canopy of trees? Where's that appear?
Do you want to keep this page, or do you feel we already covered that in our main design guidelines? Is there anything that this page would add that you would want to keep it?
Okay,
front?
I'd have to go back and see, I don't know.
Right here, page 19.
Yes, oh yes.
19, yeah.
Okay, is that covered elsewhere?
I don't think we need to talk about it.
What do you think, Melanie?
I don't think it's totally necessary. The only thing I think it does is it really points, I don't like favorite streets and their features necessarily, but I think key street features and whatnot, I don't think we should be setting neighborhoods or streets against each other, but I think the most important thing is getting across to people the sense of discovery, trees everywhere in the middle of the street, the canopy of the trees. I think these are things that we all have emphasized in the meat of the product, but if anyone thinks that this bit of repetition will help, we could just, it's short, and if it's on bullet points, it could just be added. It just depends how much we want to emphasize these particular points.
So I have a history on this section. It's interesting. So a little history on this whole favorite streets thing. This, and Melanie probably remembers this, this favorite streets exercise was one of the first exercises that the Design Traditions Project did, not this go around, 25 years ago. Oh, I guess okay. So this is a big part, and this, out of this favorite streets, asking the question of people, what makes a street feel like the most Carmel street in Carmel? The guidelines were almost born out of that conversation in a way. So that was the intent of having this here. So I would offer maybe, if there's things in here, I think Melanie, you mentioned a couple, the sense of discovery, trees everywhere. These really set the bigger tone and maybe kind of relate to the earlier page on context, because this favorite streets almost walks you through the context from top to bottom. So maybe there's a way to pick off. I think the most productive, like the best note I've gotten so far out of this conversation is everything we've seen so far has value. Figure out where that value belongs. Is it the beginning, or is it an appendix, or is it in a garbage can? So some of the stuff in this favorite streets page, I'm sure, can just go in the garbage can because it's maybe represented somewhere else. But I'm sure that there are unique things that only exist in this concept under this header. Yeah.
So yeah, this is maybe just saying it a different way, but I think that if we look at page 19 and I just try to photographically remember what we've covered in the meat, I don't think, for example, there's ever been a mention, and why would there be, of the fact that we don't have stoplights in town. Nobody who's an applicant is going to install a stoplight. So you could argue, of course it's not in the meat of the document. However, I remember moving here and having to discover that. And my child, who was very small at the time, we were remarking on that in the car, like, this is amazing. There are no lights, there are no street lights, there are no stoplights. This is very unusual. So my argument, I guess, as a process would be, if you comb through this and you say, I don't think I've ever seen that before in the meat, and it helps, I can work it into the atmospheric flavor document. if not, if it has to pass those two tests, it's not anywhere else, and it helps add something to someone's understanding of the town. And that way, I think you would go through these next several pages and only have a couple things that would come out of that have never shown up anywhere before, that really could help someone understand the town. That's a thought. Doug, what do you think?
Well, are you thinking of consolidating those 2 points from pages 19 through 24? Those undiscovered items, and having one page?
Like the treasure hunt.
Right, but one page instead of,
Or as part of the flavor essay.
I think the flavor essay is becoming more than one page, but definitely less than 10, for sure. Okay, so let's just keep going. So we did 19, I think we understand that. Page 20, citing patterns. Any comments other than the one that I think that is going to apply to all these pages of find the unique and keep it if it adds to understanding of the town. So I don't think we need that comment again. But anything new from anybody on the committee?
I see a lot of this in the meat is what I'm looking at.
Yeah, I think citing patterns would belong under context. Public landscape features should be in the landscape ordinance. It's otherwise covered in the meat of the document. The same for private landscape details. Building form and scale, I think, is really important, and I don't know how and where that is covered concisely like that in our document so far. The building form and scale, that was page 23. And building details, 24. I don't know where we can find that in the new document.
Let's hit 20 and then
Brandon, are we addressing photographs today in this? Okay.
I mean, you can say whatever you want, but no. If you don't mind, let's take the photographs. We'll get to a photograph.
Because it's wrong.
Yeah, it's wrong. Yeah. Okay, so that was page 20. I did hear a couple smatterings on further pages, but public landscape features, maybe just look around and see if anyone has any additional comments than the philosophical stuff I think we've all agreed on. 21, any comments?
So can I just address
Well, really quick, I'll just address Marion. I do believe that the last 3 pages you just mentioned are almost entirely covered in the meat of the, just so you know. I mean, where does this stuff show up? I believe it's in the current brevity core of the document, almost all of it. But again, with the treasure hunt mentality, we'll find stuff that isn't and bring it forward. But I mean, I recognize almost everything here. So.
Okay. So I think what I've taken away is these sections go away as standalone pages, but looking for the unique things that come out of them that will help either the flavor document would go into an appendix, or already covered in the meat, those, the design guidelines themselves, and it can just go away altogether. So that's the work that I'll do. Right now we're on page 21, but these comments kind of apply to everything from here on out through the rest of part 1, so the page 24. So I'm just going to look around and ask if anyone has any comments specific to page 21 itself, other than what we've already philosophically sounds like agreed on. Not seeing any. Page 22, private landscape details. Anything other than the philosophical approach? Once, twice, 3 times. And then page 23, building form and scale. Still going off of the philosophy being the same. And page 24, building details. Okay. I would suggest, Madam Chair, now that we've ended part 1, that we take our opportunity to see if anyone in the public has an extra comment on what they've just heard over the last hour and a half or so. So we actually don't have anyone left in the room, so we'll just go straight to the Zoom. David or Jason, any comments on what you've heard?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you, David.
Okay, great. A lot of work. I really appreciate where you're going with this. You know, to make it simpler and easier to approach with information that you can reference back to learn more. I think it'll really help when people are beginning, because that's, from my perspective, beginning here to try and restore homes. But thanks a lot. I know this is tough. Good work. Thanks for volunteering, everybody.
Thanks for the coaching, David.
Okay, not seeing anybody else. Jason, you're the only other one online. Do you want to say anything? We lull you to sleep, perhaps?
No, I'm good, Brandon.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks, man. Yep, thank you. All right. So, on to part 2. So we'll flip our handy, trusty matrix guide here and start on page 27. So if you recall, before we get into this too much, if you recall, the original way that projects are processed here, at least in the residential district, is that there's 2 steps along the way. We have a concept hearing, and we have a final details hearing. So the original guidelines were actually broken into 2 entirely separate documents, 2 separate volumes. You had to go find one for the concept hearing and go find one for the final details hearing. Practically speaking, that's not how the hearings have worked in a very long time. A lot of the details for the final details are discussed in the preliminary hearing. We talk about colors, we talk about materials, and it actually has been very beneficial for applicants because we end up with a better project. There's 2 swings at the ball, and the project ends up being a lot better. So this February draft that was put together combined them all into one volume, but still recognizes that people may want to start with a concept for a project and then move on to the final details. The brevity draft that we've created, the meat of that, actually has combined both of those into, if you're gonna do a good project in the city of Carmel-by-the-Sea, here's what it looks like. Functioning more actually how we do things right now already. So with that in mind, let's go through recognizing that we've condensed this, so it's not really concept and final anymore. All these things exist, these sort of concepts exist in the bigger meat. And what we're gonna do here is you'll find in this section, we are gonna jump over when we get to the specific guidelines themselves, because we do have numbered guidelines in here, 7.5, 7.6, 7.7. I talked to Victoria, we're just gonna trust that those things have been moved over, and we've already dealt with that.
Trust but verify.
We will trust but verify, yes, to use to coin a term there. But we're not there yet. But for this purpose, this is again the trimmings that go around that stuff. So all these little intro sections that exist, do we think that those intros are important when you're about to go into? Marianne's already shaking her head no. And so we'll see. So you can go home now because you've done the whole exercise already. But let's just go through. I have them listed on our tracking sheet here. I do think that some of them you'll find may actually be helpful for concepts. And it also will just spark a conversation about, because this is an organizational conversation, it may also spark a conversation about how we organize for finding specific things like windows or roofs or things like that. But let's just try to do it how we've done it. I think we're on a good roll. So page 27. This is part 2. This is was meant to be an introduction of concept design guidelines. I would offer this isn't needed anymore because we don't really do it this way anymore. But I just want to see what you all think.
Good question, Brandon, about that. Wouldn't it be possible for an applicant to utilize the Planning Commission to show, even if it's not the preferred method, to come and say, I'm thinking about putting the building here, I'm thinking about these setbacks, I don't even know if it's going to be Tudor yet or modern, but can I use my first meeting to see if this is a good idea of how to build into the hill or whatever? Someone could do that.
Yeah, so that's a great question. There's actually a third track of public hearing that people rarely use, but we do offer, that is not even like this formal concept. Because right now, the code requires the Planning Commission to adopt a resolution that says we accept the concept design. That's codified in our zoning code right now. We have another track that people can pay for. It's about half the price. That's a true concept, like fly the balloon, thumbs up, thumbs down. And that if they make a formal application, that the money they pay for that goes gets applied to the formal application. So it's like a pre-meeting. So we offer that. Not many people take advantage of it. I know, because nobody takes advantage of it. But yes, I kind of lost what your question was. I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, no, you answered my question.
Okay.
It's possible for people to engage in the process in the way that's described here.
Yeah, right.
But let me ask you something else. What I would say is, of course, this is unnecessary as it's written now, but because of what you just said, it seems to me that whatever this is, plus whatever you just said about this third option, is certainly part of the track part that would be, I don't know if it's like the bun is the flavor, and then the first, or maybe the aioli, but whatever the thing is that's introducing the use of the guidelines you're about to read, which I'm arguing would be nice to be right in before the guidelines, before the meat, that this, what you just said, should be there, and along with this, whatever of this still applies. Obviously, it's no longer going to be you need a sign off on the concept when the first meeting or whatever, but whatever it is.
This part, the design review tracks.
Are you on page what?
I'm going backward, yeah, gating project approval. So
Oh.
like pages 7 and 8, that's
Right,
where we're
this
at.
is part of that, I would argue. Does anyone agree with that? I mean, revised, so that it does, I mean, obviously, this doesn't apply anymore as it's written.
So I thought that should be at the end, because I think the steps when you design is you learn about the history and context, then you study your guidelines, and then you figure out how you get it approved, right? Yeah.
You guys moved this
That
up
was
to
the
the
decision.
appendix.
So
Yeah,
I
okay,
misspoke. I
yeah.
didn't clump it with that, but I forgot it was at the back.
Okay.
I misspoke. Thank you for catching that. I didn't mean to move it out of where we had decided to put it, but just to coagulate it there. Okay.
Okay, I didn't see any dissenting heads on that one. Okay. Then that takes us to 29, which was, I guess, where we did include those 6 guiding principles in the document. So obviously these are key to the document. So I'm just going to go out on a limb and say these are not going away. But I am curious, now that we're here at this point, where the group thinks these should live in the overall document, like right after the table of contents, right up front. Should they be at the start of the actual guidelines? Curious what everyone thinks. Maybe I saw Mary move ahead.
My understanding was that the brevity draft replaces part 2, basically, that the brevity draft doesn't need anything else but what it is right now, and it's written with these 6 principles.
So this would almost be the start of the...
No, do you think that needs that page? I don't think so. No, I don't. I think part 2 is the brevity draft, period, right? That's how I understood it would work. I don't know. You
Guys, clarify if I misunderstood.
I don't understand that we put such importance on developing those guiding principles. To see them show up in the middle of this thing boggles my mind. Unless it's covered in a different way. Because that guy gave the underlying principles indeed for everything we're talking about. I don't get it.
Yeah, I mean, every time I've printed this out, I've had these on the front page so we can see the guy. I would promote or encourage us to take a stab where this is somehow part of the table of contents. Because that flips you to, and by the way, what we were just talking about, the thing where there's different ways you can engage with the process, whether you're at a draft level or whatever. I think it might be worth, I don't know where this would be pointed out, maybe where we were talking about, but that these principles by design move from context to detail. And so really, in some ways, you can familiarize yourself with the top of it, the first 3 or 4, and then have a conversation from the Planning Commission about those 3 or 4. You can do that, is what you're saying. And what we tried to do, it didn't work. We tried to make that the enforceable kind of pattern. But yeah, so I think that this seems to me it needs to be close to, you should be able to see these early on in the table of contents area.
I think in a sense they were part of the table of contents to me. And so, again, they could be cut down, probably some too. Maybe just the headings, I don't know, with the hyperlinks.
Yeah, yeah, they would be hyperlinked. Do folks, I mean, I don't know if this, there's some bullet points here that we've never discussed.
Yeah, these weren't really discussed. Thank you. The way this is written, let's not focus on that because they've changed since then. This was put out in February, remember, and even the guidelines, the key principles themselves have changed since then. So this is more about just where call it the cover page of the brevity draft or whatever, where that should live, because I think it's still important to hit somebody right in the face with, hey, there's 6 of these things. They're going to permeate everything you're about to read. Be aware of them. So the question for you all is more about where in the document does that go? Does that go as part of the flavor? Does it go at the very front of the section 2, like the brevity draft section? That's really what I'm curious about.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it's intro / table of contents.
I have recurring thoughts through the last hour. I think we're loading too much into the atmosphere thing.
The intro, right, the
Can't do both.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, hand up.
I agree. I mean, that's part of the reason for this conversation is that as we go through each of these, and I had this same experience as I was going through and making this table. I was like, okay, that's important, that's important, that's important, that's important. Like all this stuff is important, but where does it live? And so that we want to try to be sensitive, as Dawn said, to overloading the flavor piece at the beginning, because otherwise we end up with 25 pages again, just structured differently.
I think as long as the table of contents has this list, I mean, I think one of the goals when the community was first coming up with this was like, can we get like a postcard size thing to remember? Preserve, subordinate, fit, retain, design, and detail, which is one of the reasons we strove for these action verbs. So that could be something that goes in the, just thinking of structuring the flavor piece in that way. And as long as this is somehow accessible on one page somewhere, it could be part of the table of contents. So people say, look, these are our core values. Now you click on those, they hyperlink you to the actual subpoints and the sub-subpoints. I don't think it needs to be a special page, I think you said that, Marianne. Like, this doesn't need to be sitting here by itself randomly in the middle of the document. Okay.
It's the next page.
Okay. So Dawn is making the argument that somewhere right next, it's its own document, these 6, but it's maybe right next to the table of contents.
Okay.
So it's worth trying, I think.
Do you have a copy of the brevity draft?
Yeah, I have my old working, this is my latest collection.
Okay, yeah, so I do have it.
Yeah.
I do have it. Yeah, so if it starts like that, I mean, it has another introduction, so it can't stay the way it is, because there's another introduction that doesn't work, so. So actually it doesn't, so it does need a cover page, because I thought it was structured already that way, but it isn't.
No, it's something that needs to be inserted.
Yeah.
Welcome to this thing.
Yeah. Yes, you do need that.
I think that this little paragraph, just so you all know, is just picking up on some things that are picked up elsewhere so we didn't lose them, like the idea of precedent. That's just for the conversation, right? Things about precedent, things about referring, which is throughout this. All the drafts have this information, like this is a Muni code required guideline. This is the link to the Muni code.
So when I look at that, then it would say chapter 2, right, for the of the design guidelines, and you would have to name it something, right? And then it would have those 6 principles listed, and the appendix is something that lives in the table of contents, right? So, okay, that's how it would work. Yeah, got it.
It would look more like this than that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I didn't remember it correctly.
Okay, so repeat, where are we going with this?
We're gonna have to see a mock-up.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking is,
I'm tracking with what you're all saying. I got it.
yeah.
So then that gets us to, so what these next sections are gonna be. So for example, in the February draft that was put out, 2.0 was its own section. So you'll see, 2.1, I guess it only had 2.1 because that was site assessment. This is a bad example, but like section 3, for example, you had your 3.0 that was the start of the section, and there was always a little intro and objective, and that sort of talked about what it is you're doing in that section. And then you had the enumerated guidelines, 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, which those have all been, trust and verify, those have all been picked up and carried over to the brevity draft. So that meat still exists, we're not touching those at all. But what I want to talk about in each of these sections as we go through, because there were, in the concept guideline section, there were 11 of these sections. So there was 11 sections of enumerated design guidelines that have been pulled over to the brevity draft. But what I want to look at, because these concepts still exist in the brevity draft. So the question I'm asking all you is, for these concepts, would we want to think about in the brevity draft, maybe in some places adding these little intros or explanations to what it is we're talking about, if that's not already somehow explained in the brevity draft version? Because remember, we did that brevity draft as an exercise to look at the actual guidelines themselves to see if they were good do's and don'ts, see whether they're good do's or don'ts. We didn't bring over any explanations of what we meant when we said certain things, like when we said, like a definition of a right-of-way character. Like, we don't necessarily define that in the brevity draft, or what is a street layout or grid, things like that. So that's what I want to run through is, would some of these definitions or like short 1 or 2 sentences moved over into the brevity draft versions where it's relevant to help explain what we mean by the things we say? Would that be useful? So let's try that. So section 2.0, we're on page 31. This tries to explain what a site assessment is and why it's important. So just thoughts, and I would be the first to say that any of these things that we would talk about maybe bringing over need to be edited way down, because a lot of this stuff is going to exist, but just a quick little snapshot, 1 or 2 sentences of what we mean by site assessment.
This is a process, right? So if we structure the document that we have, introduction, the meat of the document, the brevity draft, and then the process, then shouldn't this be covered in part 3 process?
Yeah, we can link to that. So it's a great suggestion, and if we want to do that, if that's the way we want to structure it, then in the meat section, if it says site assessment in one of the guidelines, that would be another one of those things that's hyperlinked back to the process side of the document. Okay, that's good.
Yeah, I think this one's a little different because it really is describing a process. I think when we move to the next ones, we'll see that it's a slightly different. But this is, I never understood why this is here. This is an instruction, it's required, it's part of the process.
Yeah, it's not even a section, it's just, I agree, yeah.
Okay, so now we're on page 32, preserving the forest character, which is 32 and 33, right? Is there any more?
Page 32, 33, no, just 32 and 33, because 34 gets to the actual guidelines that we're not going to even touch. So 32 and 33, so what this is that little preamble. We did talk about this when we were doing the brevity drafts, that some of these sections, like each of the guidelines, needs a little preamble to explain what it is we're trying to do. So this is was meant to be a preamble of what we mean and why it's important to preserve the forest character. Recognizing that in the flavor document at the very beginning, there's probably going to be allusions to that. But in this case, because we're talking about the forest character specifically, taking a couple more sentences to set people's mindset into what we mean by that. It definitely doesn't need to be 2 pages, but the way that this was organized is that it did the explanation of what we mean by preserving the character and told someone what the objectives of the section were. Maybe that's not necessary, maybe it's overkill, but I'm curious what you all think.
Well, it's right there, I think, in that brevity draft in 1.0. I don't think it needs to be any more than that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. We may find, I'm guessing what I'm going to find when I go through this is that probably the same philosophy is going to apply from the first section we talked about, that if there's some little nugget in here that didn't make it in,
That wasn't a do or die.
that's unique,
Yes.
and that gives someone an idea of why Carmel is important to keep the way it is and how it plays into that, then I think it probably is retained as a one-sentence sort of intro.
Or even a phrase or a reference to a concept, like, I mean, I'm not arguing for this one, but, stoplights. Just the fact of no stoplights. That's not a sentence even. It could be part of a list of a sentence you're, trying out.
Okay, that's great. So in essence, we're deleting, but with the caveat of keeping anything that's usable, that is unique.
It's like the treasure hunt philosophy.
Yep. Okay, so that's 32, 33. So we're going to skip 34, we're going to skip 35, and we're going to go to 36. I am going to hazard a guess that this is going to be the same for all of these. We may just want to just glance down them. Right-of-way character, I'm just going to ask the question, any different sort of approach with this one? I'm on page 36, Melanie. There you go. Yeah, right-of-way character. That's sort of, again, the preamble. Like, is there anything here that we feel is so unique, just jumps off the page right away, or just do the treasure hunt when we're restructuring this?
I love the idea of the streets are designed for walking, that they are actually, the streets are meant to look like trails, that they don't, therefore, that's why they're not hierarchical, because they're shared space. But, again, I think that's going to be obvious that it's going to be part of a description of the atmosphere of the place. But I just like that phrase, actually. But, again, little treasure hunt. I don't think we need to do that too much right now. Any other thoughts on right-of-way character, except to use it the same way? Okay. Doug's saying no. Don's saying no.
All right. Page 37, parking in the right-of-way. Any change in philosophy here? Not seeing anything. Page 38. No, so we're now at section 4.0, which is the new header. So we're in a new set of numbered guidelines, even there's only 2 in this section. But it has the same sort of preamble, preserving historic resources. And what do we mean by that? Why is it important?
Is that covered in section 4.0?
It may not be 4.0. It's a good question. So Mary Ann just asked the question, is that covered in section 4.0 of the brevity draft? It almost certainly isn't section 4.0 in the brevity draft. Oh, it is, okay. Okay, but my point was saying is that the numbers probably changed on a lot of these because when... Oh, well, look at that. Okay, there's not many of those actually. So one of the exercises that I'll be doing is going and doing that sort of side-by-side, Mary Ann, to make sure, the trust but verify thing that Victoria said. I might trust that she got them all in here, but we need to just do the exercise to see where they landed in there. Yeah, exactly.
And let me say one thing I haven't said yet, that there were times when the phrasing from the original, whether it was from this initial blurb or it was integrated into the original numbering and bullet points of the historic document and the current draft, where there is an explanatory phrase. So here's one, just an example, 4.1.2, respect adjacent historic resources by preserving adequate light. So sometimes we do have an intro, usually an intro, this is something we all worked out, an intro phrase of a sentence that starts to tell you why you're doing it. You don't have to say respect adjacent historic resources. You could say preserve adequate light, open space, and views. But we're saying, in order to respect adjacent historic resources, here's what we want you to do. So I think there's a little bit of that, and that's just something to keep. I mean, I don't know, we've done such a good job on this, we don't want to necessarily go back and look at it again. But if there's a little phrase, it's like, oh my gosh, that would really help in the meat, that doesn't make it longer, but just as, I don't know, that's what I was hunting for too, and that's what this group aimed or decided to preserve along the way. So some of it is in the meat.
Yeah, that's great, and I think that that's what this next exercise is gonna bear out, is that I think after this round, we're gonna feel comfortable that nothing was left on the table. I think we'll know that all these little extra things that drive the point home are brought over, so. I guess carrying on with that, so page 39 now, we're looking at neighborhood street character guidelines. Again, it's an intro and its objectives. Thanks, Dawn. Okay, so nothing there. Page 40, we're gonna skip. Page 41, site planning guidelines. This is another one of those weird ones that just kinda, it's not the start of a numbered section, and doesn't necessarily fall under 5.0 neighborhood street character guidelines. It's just its own little thing that exists here in the middle, site planning guidelines, that is meant to explain what this next section's all about. Again, I don't think that there's much in here that we haven't carried over, but we'll look for those golden nuggets.
Why is this right here?
It's an anomaly. There's a couple of these where it just didn't fit somewhere, and so it got stuck in. Yeah. Okay, page 42, we can skip. Page 43. Again, this is just an explanation of site drainage on page 43 at the top. This one is one where, these types of things, I think we may find where there's a more technical explanation of stuff. There may be more here that we can actually bring over, because we address, low impact development and things like that in the meat, but there's maybe more like the strategies that people can employ. So we'll look through these to find those golden nuggets, but I think the same philosophy applies. It doesn't change here if something's missing.
Add something now that I see this particular example. I might add that, and we've talked about this only briefly, and I've never kept track of it in my notes, but it makes me want to think about almost like a glossary. I know you probably were already thinking that, but like some of these, when you get technical about these things, like what is a low impact development system? And then, then you can put examples there. We already do that in the meat, but if there's some terminology that's tough for people, or even, urban street wall.
Why does that belong into design guidelines?
That's a good question. It's a really good question. The site drainage is really more of it's almost a building permit thing, and making sure that, you have the correct drainage. So I think, we had talked about it a couple times, Victoria, having a glossary of terms as well. And I think that this would be better served in a glossary. I think you're right, than in a design guideline. The only part where this wraps up talking about design stuff is that do all the stuff to make sure the site drains properly, while also providing site amenities that help enhance community image. But that just goes without saying. For anything you do in the city, don't make it ugly. And that's stated so many times in so many different ways throughout the document. So,
Well, let me just push back a little bit. We could have taken issue with that when we were doing the meat part. It's possible that some of this is outside of design, and we need to look at that again. But I think the idea that you're going to preserve water drainage ways as site amenities, that is design in my opinion. It is a guidance that the natural site you've inherited must be incorporated as part of your design. I think that's a design guideline. The idea that you're going to enhance water quality, maybe that's starting to get a little bit less designy. On the other hand, if you think that people are not going to remember to do that, I don't know. So I agree that we could look at this again, but I wouldn't eliminate all of it, I guess. Some of it's design.
We have a city drainage ordinance. We have ordinances that govern that stuff outside of design. So those are irrelevant to design, especially that last one. Yeah, that last one for sure is completely irrelevant. But yeah, that'll be something to look at, I think, when we see the put together version, the put back together version. Okay, I'm just going to keep cruising here because I think we've developed a good philosophy. We originally just planned on going from 1 to 3. Is everyone okay trying to get this done today? You guys all have another hour? or so to spare?
I don't have to go at 3:30.
Okay, you got a hard out at 3:30. Let's cruise. Let's do it. Yep.
It's possible that we have a momentum here in terms of how to handle some of this stuff.
Okay.
Because most of this is introductory information for the meet.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. Most of this is introductory information for the meet. That's true. So let's just cruise through. We'll try to go super quick then. So I'm just going to go quick. You got to yell out. I'm talking to my cohorts here at the table. You yell out if there's something you think doesn't fall under the philosophy we've already established. So page 44, the intro is about open space, site coverage, and setbacks. Page 45, there's nothing there. Page 46, we've got an explanation of what we mean by progression of spaces.
Glossary.
Yeah, we've got a potential glossary term there.
This is, we're on page 46.
Page 46, if there's something there that's technical, it can go into the glossary, perhaps. Page 47, we've got,
Losing track, are we keeping these things just as they are?
no, so what I'm proposing, Don, is I'm going to go page by page, and we're just going to assume that we're going to apply the same philosophy we've all agreed on over and over again, that pretty much it all goes away unless there's something that's unique or that can add to the brevity draft we've already done, or needs to go to like a glossary, more technical term. Otherwise, all these pages basically go away from the extra explanation that we feel is covered elsewhere. Page 47, front setbacks, why front setbacks are important. Page 48, detached garage, I know we have sections about that. Page 8, privacy and views, treat that the same. 49, skip. 51, skip. 52, parking and access. Again, these are all just preamble explanations. If there's any technical information in here or something that's unique, we'll grab it. We're on page 52. Skip page 53, skip page 54. Now we're on to page 55, where we get to building design guidelines. Still, we're talking about mass and scale, which certainly gets talked a lot about in the meet. A lot of this is carryover from the flavor document, but again, we'll look and see if there's anything that's unique. Just waiting to see if anybody jumps their hand up and says, oh, there's something special here, but I'm not seeing anything. We're skipping. Page 58. Page 59, building form. Details of building form. We've got the same format, objectives. We'll find anything unique there. That takes us to page 60. There's nothing there. And that's through part 2, design concept guidelines. So we've applied the same philosophy to part 2, which gets us now to page 61, which was broken down as final design guidelines. As I mentioned, we've combined those two, so there is no more breaking it apart as preliminary and final. It's just good design is good design. So page 62 and 63 are again those sort of preambles, which for these ones where it was meant to introduce the final phase or how that works, that especially will be rolled into the process section that we talked about that's going to go into the appendix, so you understand how the process works these days. 65, again, same philosophy will apply unless someone tells me otherwise, looking for unique things. Otherwise, this goes away. Skipping 66, skipping 67, skipping 68.
And by the way, sorry, back to 65, you're saying.
Going back to 65.
Style piece, I mean, again, here you would just, it's almost like you're doing your treasure hunt, and then it doesn't have to be the glossary or the appendix. This one could be in the history area, which is the.
That's right, yeah, so we'll take and pull out anything that's unique that doesn't exist somewhere and put it in the right place, basically. So if it's more appropriate in the flavor piece at the beginning, we'll put it there. If it's more appropriate in appendix, we'll put it there. And again, we'll come back with this as a reconstructed version, and I think it'll be easier for everyone to comment on whether something's appropriate in a section or what once you see it all put back together. That's okay. No, it was a good comment. 66, 67, 68, on to page 69. Building materials. You can see this is much the same. We have a lot of pictures, examples of appropriate building materials. This is one I wouldn't mind handing the microphone around. So we've got, this is where the first time you're gonna see this, the next few sections, each of the building materials, roofs, windows, things like that, there are a matrix following them of pictures of appropriate and inappropriate styles. So I'm curious what the subcommittee thinks when we get to the sections in the brevity draft, if there's a merit. What's that? Well, it's all over. So like page 70, it speaks to building materials like finishes. Page 74 has roofs. Page 75 shows doors. So this is where you get more to like the matrices of appropriate and inappropriate things. I know there's been discussions on both sides. Should this go in an appendix or should this live with the actual design guidelines that are meant to be instructive? So I would like a little bit of feedback on that. From a staff perspective, my feeling is that where it's appropriate, where we're talking about specific materials, I think it's more helpful to have the pictures with the actual yes or no guidelines versus referencing something later in appendix you have to go find separately. But I'm curious what everyone thinks about that.
I agree.
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 I should have been listening more carefully.
Just agree.
I think that I would argue that when this gets into so much of this gets into almost a preferred, not landscaping, but a preferred building materials list, which is something we as a group have always talked about as being a nice chunky thing in the appendix. I almost think that I think this is something we'll have to probably decide when we see the shot list a little bit more, because if you're trying to tell people, please don't lift your chimney up in the air, please don't fake this with this plastic thing or whatever, that might end up being an X. But the idea that you're going to explain the totality of all the things you can do and that we really like within the text, I'm a little skeptical, I think. Because then I think, oh, I would rather have more of that, and I'd rather have a place where I can look through and go, oh, this is what the town really likes. Like, I would consolidate maybe, all of these photos, and then have a select few that help with links, obviously, to the big thing. That's my guess as to what's going to be a layout that's going to work, but I just throw that out there as a counterpoint. And I don't think we can, I would also say I don't think we can quite decide that yet. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay. So that takes us to 9. We did 69, 70, 71, we skip. 72, skip. 73, skip. 74 is pictures. 75 is just an explanation of what we mean by entrance and porch and why it's important to character. Same philosophy I think applies to all these. Find the golden nuggets, pull them out. If they make sense, maybe smattered into the meat section, then great. More pictures. Page 77, windows. It's worth, I just want to note, this draft version and the original 25-year-old version, it treated this section differently than we're treating it now, in that windows was its own section. So if I was someone building a project and I wanted to know how to treat windows, I would go to the Windows section. But I think what we've all talked about is that we're going to use that sort of like glossary of terms or appendix to go to the back and say, if I'm a window person, what pages and what sections do I find window stuff on? Is that?
That's a really important thing. I think that's a very important aspect that I don't know that we want to put that in the back. But we have a section that deals with detail every property authentically. And if we do integrate our sample pictures, I think that is a good place to go into more detail, to lift these things out of here and put it exactly into that detail section. So, so.
Detail over on page 74. As an architect, I don't even understand the difference between the two standing seam.
Yeah.
Even the one that's desirable looks so flat to me, and the other one looks too bold, so I wouldn't know which way to go. I think we get better examples.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got a shot list, you have to do that still. Shot list is what I was saying.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I want to make sure that I took that note correctly. So for like the windows, Marianne, you said it's going to be important still to be able, within the brevity draft guidelines themselves, still have a little more specifics about what we mean when we say windows.
That is a detail.
Windows,
Yeah.
you can have a subsection,
Okay.
the details.
Yeah, because windows now maybe appear in two or three different sections of the key principles. Like it might be in section, I'm just making these numbers. It, like section 2 and section 5 may both speak to windows right now, the way that they've been broken down, because some of the window stuff is about privacy and light, and some of the window stuff is about material. So that's one of the things we've been talking about this whole time, is that the sort of reformatting does change that. That would be a reason to have a glossary at the end. If I wanted to find out about windows, I would need to go to that, an index, thank you. An index at the end that I would need to go and look under windows to find out that it appears on page 23 and 42. So that's just the solution right now. Maybe when we put it all back together, we think this doesn't work and we need to rework things like windows and doors and roofs.
But I think that, Marianne, the point that I completely agree with is that, to me, like piles of materials that we like is different than teaching someone how to detail a house. That we are talking about authenticity, we're talking about stylistic integrity, and wherever any examples that can be woven through the text while we're talking about that, I think is very important. Then, like, these are things we like also. That doesn't seem to be, has to be forced into the text if there's no room. That's all. So it's totally different. I agree with Marianne.
Got it. Okay, so I am going to shoot to get us out of here at 3:30. So we're going to go into hyperspeed here. So entrances and porches. Do you have to go right now? Okay. That's okay. Let me just ask you before you go then, philosophically, if knowing that part 3 that we're on right now is just basically the final version of the concept, this philosophy we're doing of picking out the little golden nuggets and figuring out where it goes in the document, coming back to you all with a restructure, do you see anything that needs to change on that?
That's introduction,
Mm-hmm.
design guidelines, process.
Right.
That is our skeleton.
Yeah.
I think that
Okay.
would be good. I still don't know where this would go, but it's a different.
That's okay. So will you, Marianne, as you're packing up, maybe just look down this list really quick and just see if there's something that jumps out at you on page 3, and if you see something else, let me know. Yeah, please, thank you. Okay, page, and Victoria has a hard out at 3:30, so I think we can get there. So page 75, entrances and porches, same philosophy, doors, windows, and so I got the feedback I was looking for on how to address these really specific, and they were called out specifically in both the original 25-year-old versions and this one, because these things are so important to the character of the village. So we'll figure out a way to make sure that we don't lose that. Page 80, again, balconies and decks. Page 81, Melanie's favorite, skylights. We've talked about these. Again, they were so important that they were called out separately. If I wanted to put a skylight in the city, what do I need to know about it? We'll make sure that doesn't get lost. Chimneys, same thing. Garages, same thing. We've got more pictures. Color, same idea. Page 85. And that gets us to 87. Page 87, which now we're talking about landscaping final details.
By the way, I think garages or garage doors, which is what mostly this is also in the window door. It's basically apertures. So woven throughout, I don't think it needs to be set apart like this. And then just to park this idea, I don't think you can also take photos of garages that don't show the whole building, because we can't tell what's appropriate about that. Whether it's, it's appropriate because it's well integrated, or it's appropriate because it's a nice, unique art piece, whatever is appropriate about it is hard to tell when it's too zoomed in like this. That's a side comment for the photo part.
Very good comment. I'm going to write that down so I don't forget. Okay, page 87, landscape design final details. This obviously would have plenty of links to whatever the landscape ordinance ends up being, but this is more from a, philosophical design perspective. We've got that stuff in the brevity draft already. So again, looking for the nuggets here. I'm imagining a lot of this from this page 87 would be, if it's not already in it, pulled up to that flavor piece.
A lot of this is meat, I will tell you. You can see it already. High maintenance plants and decoratives are close to the house.
Yeah, leafy, low-growing species that are easy to maintain and relatively drought-tolerant should be included in all landscape designs. Yeah, that's all. I think that's in our brevity draft already. So again, I think the philosophy we've all agreed on of going through and finding anything that's not applies here. We've got our pictures, more language, page 89. Page 90, once again, we've got the intro and objectives. We'll go through and look for those nuggets. Page 91, we can skip. Page 92, we can skip. Page 93, we can skip. Page 94. Page 94, I think that's one of those more technical things, conserving water. Page 94 is 14.0, guidelines for fences, walls, lighting, final details. We've certainly talked about that in the meat. Again, pulling out any of those nuggets. We can skip 95 because it's just numbered sections. 96 is pictures. Page 97 is gates and arbors. Again, just a definition of what we mean by that and why it's important. Page 98 is pictures. And I think maybe, Victoria, to your point, just because it was a good one, gates and arbors, treating them similar to the comment you made about garage doors, that we should see the house.
It's like, yes, true.
Yeah, as well, not just the gate. Maybe not for the bad examples, because that would be a little offensive unless it's outside of the city. Yeah, but for the good examples, I think we can give it more context.
And again, I would say this is as a building element or detail, this is something that we could use in the body of the meat, as opposed to, again, lists of materials or plantings, which I think could be appendicitis.
Exactly. Yep. Appendicitis is page 99. We're almost there. Lighting, similar philosophy. That's it. And the appendices, which we didn't even take a swing at yet. So I feel like I've got really good direction from all of you. I can go now and apply this philosophy to not only the residential guidelines, but I could take a swing at the commercial ones because they're formatted the same, thankfully, the draft from February. So I will work on that over the next month or so and come back to you. So that'll be those meetings that I listed out earlier. We'll probably get those done. And once those are done, we'll be back to talk about a restructured draft, and we can comment on that. So with that, I will hand this discussion item back over to the chair.
Okay, we're on, that was 5, 6 future agenda items. We did kind of go over that, unless anyone has any other thoughts on that. And then that brings us to adjournment. Oh, yes, please.
Timeline, Brandon. Yeah, but okay, but how long is this going to take you? I'm wondering because I'm going. Yeah, the timeline so we can see. Oh, next Friday I'm going to be out of town.
Oh, okay.
Can we do a
Thursday?
Let's see right now. The meeting's adjourned. This is not scheduled.
Okay, good.
So
Thanks,
let's
Mel.
look at.
Meeting's adjourned. Anyone who's hanging on.
Have a great day, everybody. Stay well.
So 17th is.
Recording stopped.